Hi guys. I couldn't believe it. I still can't. The feeling of betrayal cuts deeper than anything I've ever experienced. Emily, the woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with, had planned to leave me. The worst part wasn't even the affair itself, though that stung. It was the cold, calculated way she had begun to distance herself, her secret meetings, the whispers on the phone, the hushed tones when I'd walk into the room. She didn't even have the decency to be upfront about it. But what hurt the most, the part that broke me, was when I found out she had already planned her escape. I found the text messages, but it wasn't the cheating that pushed me over the edge. It was the coldness with which she had planned everything. How she would leave me once I went on that business trip. How she had already secured a new apartment. She had it all mapped out, as though I was just some obstacle to be moved around. And I wasn't even a little surprised that she'd been talking to someone else. The signs had been there, her sudden obsession with working late, the expensive clothes, the long weekends she spent with friends. When I first suspected something, I had tried to confront her. At first, she was defensive, like anyone would be when caught in a lie. But then the guilt in her eyes gave it all away. She denied it, of course, but the truth was there. I knew. And once I knew, I couldn't just sit back and let it happen. The last straw came the night I found her laptop sitting on the kitchen counter, forgotten in her haste. That's when the plan began to form. I had never been the type of person to think about revenge, but the idea took root in my mind. Emily didn't just betray me, she planned to leave me without a second thought, without remorse. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me. I was tired of being the passive husband, the one who waited for explanations, who forgave too easily. It was time to take control. I didn't go to bed that night. Instead, I sat in the living room, Emily's laptop in front of me, open and unlocked. She'd left it unattended, a mistake she would regret. As I sat there, staring at the screen, the first thought that came to my mind was how to make her pay, how to make her feel what I was feeling. But how? I wasn't a tech expert. I didn't know how to hack her accounts or expose her to the world. But then something clicked. Her job. She worked in PR for a high-profile company, and she had a reputation to protect. There was leverage in that. I knew she had a client meeting the next morning, a big one. She had been obsessing over it for weeks. She'd even mentioned it the night before, in the middle of one of our normal conversations, when she thought I was still too distracted to listen. I began by going through her emails. There were hundreds of them. She had always been meticulous about keeping everything, organizing it, archiving it. But that was her mistake. I knew the right words to search for, the right combination of terms. And that's when I found it, the smoking gun. There, in a folder buried deep in her archives, was the evidence of everything. The email exchanges with her lover, laughing, planning trips, promises of a future together. The last email from her to him was the most damning. She had talked about her plan to leave me. There were even details about how she was going to do it. I'll tell him I'm going on a business trip. He won't suspect anything, she had written. The thought of that sent a wave of nausea through me. She had been so confident, so sure that I wouldn't catch on. I could feel my hands shaking as I read through the emails. The anger wasn't just a slow burn anymore. It was a fire consuming me, every thought, every fiber of my being. I had to do something. I couldn't just let her get away with it. I started by copying the entire thread, every message, every plan, every detail of her betrayal. I wasn't going to let her walk away without consequences. But I didn't want to just hurt her. I wanted to destroy her life. To show her the depth of her mistake. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this could be bigger than just her affair. It could be the end of everything she had worked for. I turned to her social media accounts next. I knew she had a public profile, one that was connected to her work. She had carefully cultivated her image, built her brand, crafted an identity that everyone admired. But that too was a lie. The perfect life she had projected was just a facade. And I was going to tear it down. I accessed her Facebook and Instagram, her LinkedIn and Twitter. She had shared every little detail of our lives, from our vacations to our anniversary dinners. Every moment that had once felt sacred was now a tool in my hands. I began to scroll through her posts, selecting the perfect ones, The ones that would reveal the cracks in the perfect picture. I found one photo in particular that made my blood run cold. It was a picture of us, smiling on our anniversary. It had been taken at a fancy restaurant the night before she'd met with her lover. I could almost hear her laughter in the background. But now, looking at it, I saw the truth behind her smile. I saw the woman who was planning to leave me, the woman who was already halfway out the door. With a sense of satisfaction, I deleted the photo. I deleted everything. Every image of us, every post that showed her life with me. But that wasn't enough. I needed something more. I needed her to feel the way I felt. I wasn't going to just expose her to the world. I was going to ruin everything she had worked for. The final piece of the puzzle came to me later that night. I had a friend, a colleague from work who had access to some very sensitive information. He had connections to Emily's company, and he owed me a favor. I sent him a text, asking if he could do me a small favor. The favor? To make sure that the big presentation she had the next day, one she had been preparing for months, would fall apart. All it would take was a little disruption, a small leak of information, a bit of bad press. Nothing too drastic, but enough to make her look bad. Enough to make her question whether everything she had built could come crashing down in an instant. I smiled to myself as I hit send on the message. Emily was about to learn the hard way that I wasn't someone to be taken lightly. She thought she could leave me behind, destroy everything we had built, without consequence. But she was wrong. Tomorrow, everything would change. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's face, smiling, laughing, pretending that nothing was wrong while I sat there, clueless, deceived. And now, she was planning to walk away as if nothing had ever happened. As if our years together were just a brief detour in her perfect little life. The anger inside me hadn't subsided. If anything, it was intensifying. The night felt endless, but it was also a gift. The opportunity one had been waiting for was within my grasp. Emily had left her laptop out on the kitchen counter again, just like the night before. This time, though, I wasn't going to let it go. It was my key to everything, her lies, her betrayal, and, most importantly, her downfall. I hadn't planned to go this far. At first, I thought I could just expose her, send her emails to herself, make her feel the sting of what she'd done. But as the hours passed, my plans shifted. I wasn't just going to humiliate her. I was going to dismantle everything she had worked for. If she thought she could walk away with her career, her reputation intact, then she was sorely mistaken. The laptop sat there, innocently on the kitchen table, its screen dim and waiting to be opened. My pulse quickened as I reached for it. I had never been much of a tech person. My knowledge of hacking or bypassing security was minimal at best, but I had learned enough over the years to know how to manipulate situations when the stakes were high. And right now, the stakes couldn't be higher. I opened the laptop and immediately typed in the password. Emily had always kept her passwords simple, and I had guessed them a long time ago. She'd never thought twice about security, always assuming I wouldn't pry into her private life. I had access to everything now. Her emails, her work files, her messages with him. But it wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about her life, her public image, her career, the one thing she had carefully built up over the years. I was going to make sure that everything crumbled. I didn't want to waste time. The plan was in motion, and there was no turning back now. I closed the laptop and grabbed my coat, making sure to move silently through the house so Emily wouldn't wake up. The last thing I needed was for her to catch me in the act. I slipped out of the house and into the car, driving fast through the empty streets of our neighborhood. The service center I was headed to was only a few miles away, but every second felt like an eternity. When I arrived at the shop, I pulled into the parking lot and cut the engine. I had already called ahead, making sure they would be able to work on the laptop without asking too many questions. The man on the phone had been friendly, agreeing to help me back up the data for a reasonable fee. He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know what this little laptop held. I walked inside, trying to act casual as I handed the laptop over. The technician, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, barely glanced at me as he took the device. He set it down on the counter, plugged it in, and began to back up the files. I watched him work, my mind racing with possibilities. I could already see the chaos in Emily's life, the devastation when she realized her secret had been exposed. But I needed more. I needed the whole picture. I couldn't just steal her emails and messages. I needed everything, every file, every work document, every piece of personal information she had stored. I didn't care how deep I had to dig. I was going to make sure that Emily felt the weight of her lies. And once the data was copied, once I had it all, I would figure out how to use it to tear her life apart. The technician was focused, humming to himself as he worked, completely unaware of what I had in mind. I couldn't let him mess up. I needed him to be precise, to back up every single file without skipping a beat. Is it going to take long? I asked, trying to sound casual, though my mind was anything but calm. It'll take a little while, he said without looking up. I'm just copying everything over to an external hard drive. Once I've finished, you'll have a full backup. Perfect, I muttered, forcing a smile. I sat down in a chair and waited, tapping my foot impatiently on the floor. I couldn't stop thinking about what I was about to do. Emily's life was about to be turned upside down, and it would all be because of this damn laptop. Time stretched on, each second feeling like an hour. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the technician looked up from his work. It's done, he said, handing me a small external hard drive. Here's the backup. Everything's copied over. I nodded, taking the drive from him. The weight of it in my hand felt like the weight of the world. Inside it were all the tools I needed to make Emily pay. Thanks, I said, trying to mask the satisfaction in my voice as I grabbed the laptop and the hard drive. I paid the man quickly and left without another word. As I walked back to the car, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I had crossed a line, but I didn't care. Emily had already crossed so many lines with me that this didn't even feel like a betrayal anymore. This felt like justice. She thought she could destroy me without consequence, but now the tables had turned. Once I was back in the car, I drove home quickly, my mind racing. I needed to make sure that I was careful. I couldn't let Emily find out what I had done, not yet. The last thing I needed was for her to catch wind of my plan before it could unfold. I parked the car in the garage and sat for a few moments, staring at the hard drive. My hands were shaking, but not with fear. No, it was with exhilaration. I had done it. I had taken everything she held dear, everything she worked so hard for. I couldn't wait to see the look on her face when she realized what I had. Inside, the house was quiet. Emily was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit. I moved quickly, putting the laptop back on the counter in its usual spot, making sure everything looked normal. The last thing I needed was for her to suspect anything. The external hard drive sat in my pocket, its weight a constant reminder of what I now controlled. The moment I had been waiting for was almost here. I would expose her. I would tear apart the perfect life she had created for herself, and then, when there was nothing left, when her career was in shambles, when her friends turned away from her, I would finally watch her break. Emily thought she was the one with the power, but she had no idea what was coming. She had no idea how easily I could destroy everything she had built. I spent the next few days obsessively going through the files I had backed up from Emily's laptop. Every folder, every email, every document, each one was a puzzle piece, and together, they formed a damning picture. I had access to everything. All the details of her affair, her work projects, and the carefully curated image she had built over the years. But what I needed now wasn't just a personal vendetta, it was to destroy her career. I knew she had a few key competitors at her PR firm, but one man stood out above the rest, Jack. He was ambitious, ruthless, and always seemed to have his eye on the next big promotion. Emily had mentioned him in passing a few times, often complaining about how he was constantly trying to outshine her at work. She thought he was a threat, but I knew there was something more to it. Jack wasn't just a colleague. He had his own agenda, and that was something I could use. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how easy it would be to manipulate Jack into doing my bidding. If I played my cards right, I could use him to bring Emily to her knees. He was the perfect pawn in this game I was playing, and I wasn't about to let the opportunity slip through my fingers. I sat down at my desk and pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found Jack's number. I hesitated for a moment, but then I dialed it. The phone rang twice before he picked up. Hello. It was the voice of someone who didn't know they were about to be drawn into a trap. Jack? I said, my tone casual but controlled. It's Alex. I don't know if you remember me, but we've met a few times at company events. Yeah, I remember you. What's up? I've got something you might be interested in, I said, keeping my voice low and deliberate. Something that could change the game for you in a way that could really help with your position at the firm. I could practically hear him lean forward in his seat. What are you talking about? I've got access to some sensitive information, I continued, information that could give you an edge over Emily. You know, the one you've been trying to outdo. I think this could really give you a leg up. But I need a little favor in return. I heard the silence on the other end of the line, his curiosity piqued. Jack had always been driven by his ambition, and I knew this would hook him. Go on, he said finally, voice tinged with both interest and caution. I've got documents, emails, all sorts of things. Things that could destroy her reputation at the company, I said, letting the words hang in the air. I'm talking about things she's been hiding from her bosses. Her dealings with clients, actually, where she's crossed a few lines. Some of it is legal gray area, but I'm sure your legal department would have a field day with it. There was a pause. And what do you want from me? Jack asked, his voice sharpening, no longer just curious. Nothing too complicated, I replied. I need you to meet me, and I'll hand over the files. I want to make sure this goes smoothly, and I need someone who can help me make sure Emily doesn't just get away with this. I'm not trying to ruin her. Well, maybe a little, but I want her to fall hard. I want her to be left with nothing. Jack didn't respond right away, but I could tell he was weighing the offer. This sounds pretty serious, Alex, he finally said, his tone guarded but intrigued. How do I know you're not just making this up? You'll see for yourself when I show you the files, I said, confident that once he saw the evidence, he wouldn't be able to resist. But here's the deal. I need you to make sure she doesn't see this coming. You'll use this against her in the right way. I'll make sure everything's in your hands, but you'll have to keep your side of the bargain. Okay, I'm listening. When do you want to meet? I could feel the anticipation building inside me. Tomorrow night. I'll text you the location. We'll meet in person, and I'll give you everything you need to bring her down. There was a brief silence on the line. Then, all right, I'll be there. Just send me the details. I hung up the phone, a rush of satisfaction flowing through me. Jack was already in my pocket, ready to do whatever it took to climb the corporate ladder. And he would do exactly what I wanted, use Emily's secrets against her to take her down. I could already picture it. Jack, with the information in his hands, strategically leaking it to the right people, watching Emily's career collapse as her reputation crumbled in front of everyone. It was all going to fall apart so beautifully. The next day, I set the plan into motion. I made sure the files were ready, all neatly organized in a folder on the hard drive. I didn't just want Jack to have access to the emails and documents. I wanted him to understand just how bad things could get for Emily if this information was made public. I included everything. The emails with her lover, the shady dealings with clients, the moments where she had manipulated situations for her own benefit. I even threw in a few confidential work documents that would expose her mistakes to the higher-ups at the firm. But I didn't just want to hand over the files and walk away. No, I needed to make sure Jack would use them exactly the way I wanted. I had to manipulate him into doing my bidding, making sure Emily would never see it coming. That evening, I sent Jack a text with the details of where to meet. It was an unassuming cafe on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes. The kind of place where people could meet in private and not be disturbed. I arrived early, my heart pounding in my chest, knowing this was the final step in setting my plan into motion. When Jack walked in, he looked around briefly, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me. He was wearing a crisp suit, looking every bit the part of someone trying to make their mark in the corporate world. I could see the greed in his eyes, the hunger for more. He sat down across from me, a look of cautious curiosity on his face. "You've got the files?" he asked, getting straight to the point. I nodded, pulling the hard drive out of my bag and placing it on the table between us. "Everything you need is right here," I said. This is all the leverage you need to make sure Emily's career is destroyed. But there's one thing I need from you. Jack's eyes narrowed. And what's that? I need you to make sure she takes the fall for everything, I said, leaning in slightly. I don't want her to walk away from this. I want her to burn. So, when you make your move, you make sure she has no way out. No excuses. I want her to lose her job, her reputation, everything. She deserves it. Jack looked at the hard drive, his fingers tapping on the table. I could tell he was considering it. All right, he said, a smirk forming on his lips. You've got yourself a deal, Alex. I pushed the hard drive toward him. It's all yours. As Jack took the drive, I couldn't help but smile. This was it. The plan was set in motion, and Emily had no idea what was coming for her. Everything she had built was about to be ripped apart, piece by piece. She thought she was going to walk away from this unscathed, but I was going to make sure she never saw the fall coming. I'd been so consumed with revenge that I hadn't realized how much I'd been neglecting everything else in my life. The weight of it all, the bitterness, the planning, the daily scheming to bring Emily down, had been heavy on my shoulders. But somewhere in the midst of it, a change had started to happen. It wasn't something I had expected, and I certainly hadn't sought it out. But as fate would have it, it came in the form of Sarah. Sarah was a colleague at work. She wasn't close to Emily, but I'd always known her. We'd exchanged a few words in passing, maybe a quick chat in the kitchen or at a company meeting, but nothing ever really beyond that. But now, in the aftermath of everything, I started noticing her more. She seemed to notice me too. It was subtle at first, just small talk during breaks, a few comments about projects we were both working on, nothing that felt overt. But with each passing day, I found myself looking forward to our conversations more and more. It was a relief to talk to someone who wasn't involved in the mess of my personal life, someone who wasn't caught up in the whirlwind of lies and deception that Emily had left me to untangle. Sarah's energy was different, light, easy, unburdened. There was no drama between us, no history of betrayals or guilt, and I found myself drawn to that simplicity. I didn't even realize when it happened, but it wasn't long before we began spending more time together outside of work. It started with small things, a quick coffee here, a walk in the park there. But those moments began to feel significant, like an escape from everything I had been carrying around for months. I didn't have to explain myself to Sarah. She didn't need to know what had happened with Emily, or why I was so angry, or why I was behaving the way I was. Sarah didn't ask those questions. She was just there, and that was exactly what I needed. One evening, after another long day of work, we ended up at a local bar. Neither of us had planned it. It was just one of those spontaneous things where we both happened to be there, and somehow, it felt right. We ordered a couple of drinks, and the conversation flowed easily. We talked about work at first, boring stuff, nothing too exciting, but eventually, the topic drifted. She started talking about her own life, her past relationships, her family, her goals. I listened, and I felt a strange connection growing between us. There was no pretense with Sarah. No judgments. Just two people sharing thoughts in a way I hadn't done with anyone in a long time. At some point, our hands brushed as we both reached for our glasses. The touch lingered for a second longer than necessary. It wasn't anything overtly sexual, but it felt like an unspoken acknowledgement, something between us that hadn't been there before. I could tell she felt it too. It was the kind of moment that, in hindsight, I should have stepped back from. But I didn't. I let it happen. The next thing I knew, we were laughing together in the corner booth, the evening slipping into something much more intimate than I had expected. Her laugh was easy, her smile bright, and I found myself smiling too, genuinely, for the first time in what felt like ages. There was no anger there, no bitterness. No thoughts of Emily, of betrayal, of revenge. Just Sarah and me in that moment, and it felt good. I hadn't realized until then how much I had needed this. By the time the bar started to empty out, it felt natural to suggest we go back to my place. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but the idea of going home alone didn't feel right anymore. Not after a night like this. I wanted her with me. I needed her there. It wasn't anything planned. We didn't talk about it. We didn't need to. When we got back to my apartment, Everything unfolded in its own way. No rush, no pressure. It was as though we both knew that this wasn't about making any promises or defining anything. It was just a night, an escape from everything that had been weighing on me. The next morning when I woke up, I wasn't consumed with guilt. I had expected to feel a heavy burden, like I had betrayed Emily somehow, but I didn't. I had no loyalty left to her. I had already taken everything from her that I could, and now, I was letting myself breathe for the first time in months. I didn't feel guilty about Sarah. Not at all. I wasn't using her to get over Emily. That would have been too easy, too self-destructive. No, this was different. There was something real in the way I connected with Sarah, something uncomplicated. For the first time in ages, I felt like I was allowed to be myself. I didn't need to hide behind a mask of anger or revenge. With Sarah, I could just be Alex. And that, for now, was enough. We spent the next few days together, spending time in the evenings after work. There were no expectations, just companionship. We shared meals, went for walks, talked about everything and nothing. It was light, easy. And while there were moments where I couldn't help but think about what I was doing to Emily, about how my revenge was slowly unfolding, piece by piece, I didn't feel guilty about my time with Sarah. She wasn't a distraction. She wasn't a tool in my revenge. She was her own person, someone who was helping me see a way out of the darkness that had consumed me. But it wasn't just the escape that kept me coming back. It was her warmth, her laughter, her kindness. Sarah made me feel like I wasn't just a man consumed by anger or resentment. She saw me as someone else, as just a person. It felt good. I hadn't realized how much I missed that feeling, being seen as something other than a victim of betrayal, as something more than the person plotting revenge. And in the quiet moments, I found myself questioning how far I would let this go. I wasn't looking for anything serious, not right now. But the way Sarah made me feel, maybe there was something there. Maybe it could lead somewhere, even if I wasn't ready to face that possibility yet. But for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to consider it, to let something positive grow, without the weight of my past hanging over me. The more time I spent with Sarah, the more I realized I didn't have to carry this burden alone. She gave me something I didn't even know I needed, peace. When I was with her, I wasn't the man who had been betrayed. I wasn't the man plotting revenge. I was just Alex, a man learning how to live again. For the first time in a long time, it felt like I could move forward. And I did. Every day. One small step at a time. The first sign of Emily's career starting to unravel came in the form of a phone call that I intercepted by accident. It was a Wednesday afternoon, just after lunch. I was sitting at my desk, my mind spinning through the usual mix of thoughts: work, revenge, Sarah, and the occasional moment of self-reflection. My phone buzzed on the edge of the table, the screen lighting up with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something made me pick it up. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I was ready to see the beginning of Emily's fall. Hello. Ahem, is this Mr. Alex Carter? The voice on the other end was crisp, professional. Yes, who's this? This is Rachel Foster, a senior manager at your wife's company. I'm calling regarding some serious concerns we've encountered. It's about Emily. My pulse quickened. What about her? Well, we've come across some very disturbing information, Alex, she continued, speaking as though she were reading from a prepared script. It seems that several confidential documents have been leaked to one of our competitors, and based on what we know so far, there's evidence that points to Emily's involvement. I need you to tell her to come in for a meeting. We have to address this immediately. The words were like ice, hitting me in waves. I sat there frozen for a moment, the reality of it all sinking in. Sarah's name flashed across my mind, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't about her, not yet. This was about Emily, and how her world was falling apart, piece by piece. I ended the call with a promise to pass the message along, but I didn't immediately tell Emily. Part of me wanted to savor the moment. I wanted to see her face when she finally realized the damage had been done. That night, after dinner, she was on edge. She had been acting differently for a few days, a little more paranoid, a little less confident. I could tell something was eating at her, but I had no intention of easing her mind. She was pacing around the kitchen, her eyes glued to the phone, probably trying to manage the fallout from whatever Jack had done with the files. I leaned against the doorframe, watching her like a silent observer. "I need to talk to you," she said suddenly, her voice tight, as if she were afraid to ask for something she already knew I wouldn't give. "What's going on?" I replied casually, though my heart was thumping in my chest. "You've been acting weird lately," she said, turning to face me, her eyes searching mine. "I can feel it. What aren't you telling me?" I shrugged, pretending to be indifferent. "Nothing. You've got enough on your plate. You're busy at work, with your important career stuff. I'm sure everything's fine." That was when the phone call came in. The one I'd been waiting for. Emily's face went pale when she saw the caller ID on my phone. "Why is Rachel calling you?" she asked, her voice rising. "I thought I was supposed to handle this." I watched her squirm. Her panic was almost palpable, and I knew then that her career, her carefully constructed world, was beginning to slip through her fingers. I didn't answer her question right away. Instead, I handed her the phone. She hesitated but finally took it from me. "Hello," she said, her voice shaky. The conversation was brief, but the aftermath was clear. As soon as Emily hung up, she dropped the phone onto the table and buried her face in her hands. "This can't be happening. This is a nightmare. How could this happen? Isn't that what happens when you get too greedy?" I said, my voice sharp. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with disbelief. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've been too busy playing everyone, your bosses, your clients, me, to notice the mess you were creating," I said, my words coming out like daggers now. "You thought you could just walk away from everything, didn't you? Well, now you're going to pay the price." Her face twisted with anger. "Are you blaming me for this?" she hissed. "This is your fault, Alex. If you hadn't turned into this monster, I wouldn't be in this situation. You did this," I shot back. "You leaked the information. You made the choices. And now it's all coming back to you. All of it." Emily stood up abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor. "I should have left you when I had the chance," she said, her voice rising. "This isn't just about my career, is it? It's about you wanting to punish me, to make me suffer for everything. You think this will make you feel better, don't you?" I didn't answer her immediately. I just watched her, feeling the anger I had kept bottled up for so long simmering inside me. Emily had been so sure of herself, so confident that she could just walk away from me, from everything. She hadn't seen what was coming. None of this was just happening to her. It was the culmination of everything she'd done to me. "I'm not trying to make you suffer," I said coldly. "I'm trying to make sure you realize the consequences of your actions. You ruined this marriage. You ruined everything." Her lips trembled, and for a brief moment, I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. But then it was gone, replaced with something darker. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You've destroyed everything, Alex. You're just as bad as I am. You think you're the victim, but look at what you've become." I couldn't hold it in any longer. "I don't want this anymore," I said, my voice breaking through the tension. "I want a divorce." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked like she might collapse. "What?" "I want a divorce," I repeated, the words finally coming out as a sharp, final declaration. "I'm done. This is over." Emily's face contorted with fury. "You can't just throw everything away, Alex. We've been through too much. You can't just walk out now. This is insane." "I've already walked out," I said quietly. "Mentally, I've been gone for months. You just didn't notice until now." She grabbed her bag, her eyes wild with anger. "You're a coward, Alex. You think you can just destroy everything? My career, my life? You think that's going to make you feel better?" I stood there, unmoving, watching her tear out of the house like a hurricane. "It's not about making me feel better," I said, almost to myself. "It's about making sure you can't just walk away without facing the consequences." The divorce wasn't the end of it, though. It was just the beginning. The leaks continued, one after another, the information Jack had gotten his hands on spreading like wildfire. Emily's career, once full of promise, began to crumble as her reputation took a nosedive. There were whispers in the office, talks of investigations, rumors about her involvement with competitors, And the damage done was irreversible. Her colleagues started distancing themselves, clients pulled back, and her bosses gave her the cold shoulder. Her world, her carefully curated empire, was collapsing under the weight of her choices. I knew it wasn't enough to just leave her. She had to understand that she couldn't get away with it, that there were consequences for everything she had done. And as Emily watched her career slip away, piece by piece, I realized something. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about closure. Goodbye.